Part of this is also selecting the right size chunk for you. It's one of the several reasons why asking beginners to play a full pibroch is obviously a bad idea. It's too much of a chunk. It's too much.
Yeah.
Like, these are people getting a feel for things. They're getting a feel for solo competing and so on. And then you're asking them to play 10 straight minutes in front of a judge. However, with all that said, maybe by forcing people to grab such a big chunk, you're forcing them not to be perfectionists, because obviously that's not going to happen, I guess. But it seems to me like a bite-sized chunk where you can work at it and feasibly be really successful is probably a smarter idea. It makes sense. These internet people, they know what they're doing.
Yeah.
Speaking of internet people that know what they're doing.
Not going to find any of them here, that's for sure.
Yeah. You're definitely not going to find too many of them inside Dojo U either. We literally have classes called Andrew and Carl Teach the Internet.
Oh, yeah. That's fun. You know, when I first got married, I was working for a major technology and internet provider. And
I see what you did there. You're protecting their identity.
Trying to be careful there, yeah. My job ended up being, I wasn't hired for this, but pretty quickly my job ended up being teaching like workshops for people who were new to this technology. And it's like a consumer technology that all of us use, but some people just hadn't used it before. Which, like, yeah, I'm not trying to be ageist or anything like that, right? But like, that's specifically what the class was like old folks show up early and Jim shows them how to use their stuff.
Yeah. We're those guys, Jim. We're those guys.
Yeah.
We're guys that have a podcast together from 2,500 miles away. We're those guys.
Yeah, we're those guys.
Don't you have to be in the room together to record together? This actually works out great. Like, this little software that we adopted when we first started. Remember, it took a while to get used to. Turned out you just needed a proper internet connection, which it's amazing on this topic that you did not already have.
Yeah. Well, you know, it's kind of like, you know, people talk about how like a doctor's kids are always sick. The cobbler's kids always need new shoes. The fact that I work in telecom maybe explains the fact that my telecommunication situation is rickety as I'll get out. Yeah.
Yeah, you live next door to the zoo, but you don't know anything about animals.
Yep.
Elephants have literally busted out into your backyard, but you never go to the zoo.
Yeah.
I just love a good internet connection, Jim. My house is wired up because like the Wi-Fi doesn't work great down in the basement where my lair is. So I literally like drilled holes in the house to run a cable from my router all the way there. It's on the far end.
You're very committed. I can understand the appeal for sure.
It's what I do all the time, and I just can't stand when the internet lets me down. Can't stand it. Which is why I tolerate paying Spectrum money, one of the most evil corporations on planet Earth.
They've got you and they know it, and you know
Spectrum, like it's all these companies, right? Spectrum, Verizon. Oh God, they're so yucky. They're so yucky and gross. Yeah. But they get the good quality internet connection, don't they? The old Spectrums.
They've got us trapped.
I'm not afraid to speak out against Spectrum on our podcast, Jim. I got an ad once for business internet, and it was $49 a month for high-speed business internet. And I thought to myself, holy crap, I'm calling them. I'm getting that. When I called them up, we were talking through how great it was, and they signed me up, and they're like, cool, your bill's going to be $117 a month. You're all set to go. And I was like, wait, hang on.
Whoa.
No, this is the $49 business internet. And they're like, no. And I was like, yeah. Here's a screenshot of the ad I saw. They're like, oh, well, you're from Albany. And I said, yeah. And they said, well, this is for people in Poughkeepsie and closer to New York City, not people in Albany. But it's like, but I saw the ad. And then I looked it up and they're like, no, sorry, Albany doesn't apply to this. And the reason why is they have no competitors in Albany. So they have no reason to offer me the deal. They also have no reason to honor what they showed me on their advertisement.
That does sound pretty
evil. Because what am I going to do? I can't go anywhere else.
Yeah.
Because they just like monopolize this market and then they charge you double for it. Not only that, after a year or two, they just start hiking your price up every year. It's like built into how it works.
You get the notification that says we're now charging you more, and it's like, oh, that's it. There's not a question mark at the end of that statement or anything like that, you know. It's just like, oh, this is just what it is. How did this happen?
Yeah. Anyways, this podcast is brought to you by Spectrum.
The evil Big Brother corporation.
So bad. We could talk about why I think they're able to get away with it, but it wouldn't go anywhere, Jim.
Well, do you feel motivated to talk it through because now that we've started talking about it, you want to finish talking about it?
No, because I didn't really commit to it up front.
It's
that is what
just
we
a
thought we
situation
might
you're
talk about
stuck
today.
with.
That's right. I made no commitment to it. I'm just stuck with it. So if anything, it's the antithesis of what I want to talk about today, Jim.
That makes sense. I got you. There's a difference there.
Yeah. So I think what I want to talk about today is I have a student, Jim.
You have a
Shall
lot of
remain
students,
nameless.
Andrew.
I do. But I've been working with this one in person.
Mm.
Let's just say this student's from my neighborhood.
You're keeping
And,
them anonymous, but if they hear this story, are they going to absolutely know exactly that this is about them right away?
Maybe, but I don't know. But anyway, this student that I have does this thing that they'll start playing something, and then whenever something even slightly goes wrong, they'll immediately stop. Usually they feel really upset, and then they're forced to go back to the beginning and try it again. And then oftentimes they make an error in the exact same spot, and then they stop and they reset. Are you familiar with this? I feel like it's really common.
Yeah, definitely common. I'm familiar with it from seeing it in people I've taught as well on various instruments. It's not just a bagpipe thing. See it in my kids. See it in myself. I do it too. Yeah. I have to be aware of it and like decide to plow through. Otherwise, yeah, I definitely get into that headspace where it's like, oh, every time I hit that problem, I back up and start again.
Right. So when is that a good thing to do? When is it a good time to throw in the towel and quit early on a passage that you're working on?
I feel inclined to say never. Like I end up doing it so much, but I feel like I've seen the wisdom of powering through, and so I feel like that's got to be like the default.
Yeah, I do feel like if something goes catastrophically wrong and you still have like 14 minutes to go, like there is a quitting algorithm that you might end up using where you're like, wow, it's just not worth continuing. I should start this thing again. Like, for example, if you go radically off the tune early in the ground, like I get it. There might be a time where you could stop, but usually the right thing to do would be to push through, keep the train on the tracks, and keep going.
I'd bet there's like infinite gray area too, but like I wonder if pretty often the smart thing to do might be stop and back up a few notes, a few bars, and try to get that trouble spot done rather than stop and start at the intro E yet again.
Yeah. I think it's important to always finish what you start. Now, just always with an asterisk, because I've never really talked this through before, so we might find some exceptions. But when you're practicing, it's so important to finish what you start. So in this case, my student keeps getting caught in one thing where the plan was to play the whole part, maybe even the whole tune. Then you make a small mistake and then you quit and you start from the beginning again. I think it's really important that if you decide to play a whole part, that you play the whole part if at all possible. Now, if the train goes completely off the tracks, that would be one thing. But if you're able to keep it on the tracks, that's what you should do, and you should go all the way to the end of the part. Once you've done that, once you've fulfilled that commitment to yourself, then it would be a good time to say, well, a really bad thing happened in the first bar there. Let's zero in on that. Let's work on that and see if we can get rid of it before we try and play the full part again. Like that makes a lot of sense. But we kind of want to fulfill our commitment. And Jim, before we started recording, I was saying, it kind of reminds me of if you sign up for
Spectrum.
If you sign up for like ice skating lessons, right? And your kid wants to quit after the first lesson, even though you signed up for 10 lessons, we wouldn't really want that, right? It was like they want to quit because they didn't have a perfect experience at the first one or something like that. It's like, well, we made a reasonable size commitment. Maybe 10 weeks is a little extreme. Let's go with 4 weeks.
Sure, 1 month of lessons. Yeah,
we signed up for 4 weeks of ice skating lessons. We're not going to quit after the first one. We're going to do all 4, and then we can quit if we want, because we've made that commitment. By the way, that might be particularly important when you make a commitment to a team. Nothing made me more upset back in the day than people who quit the band partway through the season. Just get to the end of the season, then quit. People are counting on you.
Yeah, that makes a difference.
Gross. But anyway, finish what you start. What do you think, Jim? What are your thoughts?
It makes a lot of sense to me. Pretty recently, my daughter was getting ready for a recital, and this was like, I think we're naturally thinking about new tunes that we're learning in this situation, and that's probably where it's most applicable. But in this case, she actually was getting ready for a recital. So it's like the way that her piano program does recitals, they look back at all the material they've learned in that semester, and each kid picks 2 songs, and they're supposed to play those 2 songs for the recital. So these were things that were familiar for her. And when she sat down, she's like, I remember I like this song. She sits down to play it, and she starts playing, and she hits a mistake, gets stuck, backs up to the beginning of the song, plays again. And she's in that rut, and I see that. And I'm not trying to say I'm so wise or anything like that, right? But I told her, hey, what if instead just play through slow and see how it goes, and every time you hit a tricky part, let's just use a pencil to mark that spot, and then you know where all your trouble spots are, and then we'll work on those. Because otherwise, it was becoming clear that she was going to spend the entire session on the first 3 bars of this song.
Well, and it's going to become a meltdown quick.
Yeah,
right?
That was coming too, for sure.
For sure.
Yeah.
With young people, for sure. But even with old people, it becomes a meltdown quick. But I think it also amplifies the fallacy that perfection is what you're shooting for, right? I think that's especially with kids, that's the most important thing. It's like, look, this isn't about perfection. And sometimes you could have a big blemish in a performance that was amazing, right? Like, think about Jar Jar Binks in the scope of all 9 Star Wars movies. Jar Jar Binks was a horrible misstep, but like, the series as a whole is still pretty entertaining.
At this point, would any of us do away with Jar Jar?
No, I wouldn't. I would try again. I think I was telling this to Jack Lee, actually. Maybe it wasn't Jack Lee. I was telling this to somebody.
These are the things that the bagpiping greats of the world get up to when they're talking to each other.
I was telling this to somebody, like I would kill to see the entire Star Wars story again, but just well done. You know what I mean? Fascinatingly, I like the last 3 movies the best, just because they're well done. But by the way, the final movie, terrible, super cringy writing. Like, what happened? The story's so cool though. Like, it is a cool story, and I like the characters. But the final Ewan McGregor movie, that's an incredible story, extremely poorly done. Like the movie as a whole. I love the final sequence though. But I digress. What are we even talking about, Jim?
Well, it might be that these things are all applicable to maybe not every situation, but at least in some, that like if you have a clear picture of how it goes from the beginning to the end, then maybe you're going to have a better, smoother time getting through the whole thing. Maybe it's advantageous to get a feel for the whole thing. And if you're in this situation where you're only going to go until you make a mistake, stop and restart, you're going to become really familiar with the first 4 bars and not know where it goes after that.
Part of this is also selecting the right size chunk for you. It's one of the several reasons why asking beginners to play a full P-Brock like we do in the EOSPBA is obviously a bad idea. It's too much of a chunk. It's too much.
Yeah.
Like, these are people getting a feel for things. They're getting a feel for solo competing and so on. And then you're asking them to play 10 straight minutes in front of a judge. However, with all that said, maybe by forcing people to grab such a big chunk, you're forcing them not to be perfectionists, because obviously that's not going to happen, I guess. But it seems to me like a bite-sized chunk where you can work at it and feasibly be really successful is probably a smarter idea. I would love to see. I would love to see that, Jim. I'm crazy.
Like, are you thinking? You think you'd love to see the
no,
competition be ground only kind of thing?
I'd love to see grade 4 competitions be smaller chunks. Smaller. I don't need 4 parts of a 2/4 march in grade 4. I want to hear 2 parts played really well. I want to hear people deliver. I just do. That's what I want to hear. I never, ever am judging grade 4 thinking, I need to hear the 3rd and 4th parts here. I never think that. It's already clear what's going on after 2 parts. And then, it's tough to say. But however, to just travel somewhere to just play for 30 seconds or whatever, that doesn't make sense either. So I get it. Maybe it is the right size chunk.
But when you're like learning a tune or working on one on your own, picking the right size chunk becomes an entirely like internal decision, where you're going like,
and people should start small. People should start small, right? So
it could
be
as small as one note to the next, right?
I recommend starting, like, the good default is to start with 1 bar. Okay. And play 1 bar of music really well. We have a couple of tricks that we use for that process, but like the concept is really simple. We're going to start with 1 bar. Now, if you start with 1 bar, like 1 bar of Bonnie Ann, is a lot different than 1 bar of Scotswood hay, right? So it's depending on what you're learning, but you might find that even a bar might be too big. So we might start with half a bar. Okay, but that's going to be the commitment I'm going to make to myself, right? And then I'm going to play that commitment from start to finish, basically regardless of what happens. Regardless of what happens, I'll get to the end of that small commitment that was manageable, that was selected wisely. I'm going to get to the end of that commitment and I'm going to say, cool, how did that go? What's the lowest hanging fruit to address the next time I attempt it, right? And then you'll work that small chunk up into something that's excellent. Note, I don't say perfect. It should just be excellent. It should be a score of 9 out of 10. Nothing's ever perfect, so I'm not worried about that. But like, man, I give myself a solid 9 out of 10 for that. That was good. Cool. Now, let me get a 9 out of 10 several times in a row. And that would be a good indication that I've learned that small chunk really well. Then we can move on to the next chunk. And then what I recommend doing is doubling back and putting your 2 chunks together. So now you've made a bigger chunk. Confirm that you can play that bigger chunk to a quality of, let's say, 9 out of 10, right? And you can see how we kind of build our way through this. Okay.
Yeah.
Now, meanwhile, if we rip off a really big chunk of bread, if we rip off a chunk that's way too big, we're going to get halfway through the first bar and we're going to hit a major mistake of some kind. And then we're going to want to stop and start again. And we're going to hit a mistake and we're going to stop and start again. And that's just sort of reinforcing something really bad. And you're also teaching yourself to quit anytime the going gets tough. I think you are.
That makes sense to me. And it also makes me worry about like training some part of my brain or my nervous system, something to do with the motor skills for playing what I'm trying to play, that like if I'm hitting that E doubling and every time I hit that E doubling, I stop and restart, I'm worried that there's some part of me that's, below the level of my conscience. It's just going to consciousness.
Conscious mind?
Conscience is like Jiminy Cricket, right? So that was silly.
Yeah.
That's not what I'm going for.
I feel like it was a simple error.
That was a simple error, and I stopped, and I didn't power through. I'm now backing up to restart.
Yes.
But what I'm worried about is that like I'll train myself to stop and restart at that point. You know what I mean?
Interestingly, Jim, just to stop you there. Interestingly, I think in my mind, I did notice that you made a slight error there, but had you just gone through and not acknowledged it, it probably would have been forgotten quickly and easily because the substance of what you're saying was so excellent and enjoyable.
Oh, well, thanks for saying so. But that's an interesting point. It's that's what it could be like in a performance too, huh? You could have a little flub, but if you carry through and keep that groove, to quote the great Victor Wooten yet again, if you can hang on to that groove, it's going to be okay. It'll still be enjoyable.
Yeah, exactly. And by the way, sometimes bagpiping, maybe not so often because we're sort of, generally speaking, traditionalists, but sometimes mistakes can become inspiration.
Absolutely,
like,
yeah.
Yeah, I accidentally played a Terre Lewis there instead of a grip, but that sounded really awesome. So I'm going to keep doing that. Like, whoops, I'm just going to talk about my conscience a lot. My conscience. Conscience.
Yeah, suddenly every tune is like a real matter of morality because it's all about your conscience. So not to overlabor this with yet another metaphor, but it does make me think of like ruts in you ever like drive up a mountain road, a dirt road, and if the
feedback,
vehicles
natural feedback.
Oh, for sure, yeah. You know where the ruts are because you'll get stuck in them, don't you?
Yes. Where do ruts come from, interestingly? Well, in the case of a road, it's a negative feedback loop. You drive your car in the road. People tend to drive in the same place, but then it starts to wear a shape. But then because that shape is there, it tends to encourage more people to drive there and more. And that's how a rut forms. It also happens with dirt roads, like where the puddles go and where the rivets end up, right? It comes from rainfall, but as soon as you have a slight indentation, rain tends to flow there more. Well, it's a positive feedback loop, but it can be negative in the case of that, right? And by the way, the same could be true for practicing. You're teaching yourself that at every hardship, it's okay to pout and throw in the towel and quit and start again, right? And you're teaching yourself that over and over and over again. That is how a bad habit is formed, and it's going to be really hard to kick. Instead, let's form a good habit, which is, unless the train completely falls off the track, I'm going to finish the chunk that I committed to doing first.
Yeah. I remember Stephanie Burns writing about, I think she had a chapter in, I forget which book it was, but one of her books where she said something like, treat your brain like a baby. And what she then explained from that was like, don't like look at every little mistake you make while practicing and be mean to that baby and be like, why'd you mess up again? Like you wouldn't do that to a baby. Instead, let it keep
Well,
messing its way through the thing and celebrate at the end of the, like it took its few faltering steps through the tune. Be like, yeah, good job. And then try it again.
we
And
do that to babies though, don't we? And this
hopefully
isn't
not
to
in
go,
too mean of a way.
but like but it happens all the time. You're like, crap. As a parent, Jim, tell me, at least pretend you do this as well, where you're like, man, that's just a kid. I was way too hard on the kid.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
I was treating that kid like an adult, but the kid is just a kid. And so I shouldn't have
Yep.
done that. Right? You should know better than that. It's like, well,
Yep.
the kid's
Then later you
free.
reflect like, why would they know better than that?
Yeah.
Geez.
So, and instead, what did I just do? Like I told them they should know better than that. And then I just accidentally taught them that you should have unreasonable expectations of some kind of refinement or perfection, like way too early in the process.
Yeah.
Right? Bad.
Yep.
By the way, just rewind. I think she's
Yeah.
totally right.
Maybe the clarification should be treat your brain like a baby as if you were a mature and good parent who's got it all together.
Yes. Remember to be a perfect parent at all times.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Now, Andrew, one thing that comes to mind, I wonder if one side of this coin or like one extension of the problem, if I'm doing this thing where I stop every time I make a mistake and then back up again, could be that then that means that the one time I do get that part right that has been tripping me up, I'm just going to keep going. It's like I'll mess up on it, go back, mess up, go back, mess up, go back. By sheer luck, I got it and I just keep going. And I never, it's like, whoo, finally got it.
There's
And-
no more errors to worry about, right?
Right. Yeah. And of course,
No,
then
as
the
it
next
turns
time I
out-
play it, I'll have the same problem.
That's right. Well, that's the other problem, right? So you end up fixating and getting stuck in this one spot. And by allowing that to happen, you're neglecting all the other spots. And by the way, like there might be a far bigger issue somewhere else. Or you might discover that that is truly the spot that needs the most attention because everything else actually is pretty smooth and easy, right? But the important thing is that we got to spread it out and we have to like let those errors happen. By the way, we do this all the time naturally and it's obvious. Like when you're driving your car down the road, you're not driving it perfectly down the center of the lane. You're making little errors all the time. And then you're making those fine adjustments as you go, right? And that doesn't seem strange, right?
You're not stopping your car and backing up and being like, I really want to stay parallel there.
Imagine that on a big interstate, just like
I
slamming
just
on
want to
the
have
brakes.
a perfect run.
And slamming the brakes back up. Sorry, guys, I drifted a little over, so I got to try that again. It's like, nope,
Rumble
that's not how
strips.
it works. Yeah. Well, and then it begs the question, what's the goal, right? So when we drive a car, the goal is to get to where we want to go. I think it exposes that when we learn a bagpipe tune, the goal is an unrealistic, silly goal of trying to play it perfectly, right? It's that fixed mindset. It's like, no, each time you do something, it's an opportunity for observation and growth. And here's another thing that's really interesting. Have you ever met a top piper and you ask like, what'd you think? How'd you think it went out there? What do they always say?
It could have been better.
Nobody says it was like the best run I've ever done.
Yeah,
and
no
it
one
was
ever
pretty
says it's
close to
perfect.
perfect. No one ever says that because that's not how you got there, right? Like what everyone will say is, oh, it was not bad.
Yeah.
Things went pretty well. A few things like that's the Scottish line, right? You have to drink every time a famous piper says, there were a few wee things, indicating that there's quite a bit in that performance that they thought was not optimal, but they got through it. And to our ears, it sounded splendid.
Yeah.
It's also easy to play a great performance that you were sure was great and the judge hated it. You might have been sure it was great while you were playing and then you listened back to a recording and you hated it. Or vice versa.
Certainly.
The other thing too is like persevere through the mistakes and you listen back and you think to yourself, despite that mistake, it was excellent. A good example of that might be when I won the silver medal in 2017 in Kansas City. I came off and I was kind of focused on the fact that I missed a Crunluith, missed it. And that's what I was thinking. I was like, the tune was pretty good, but man, I had a couple misses. I hope that doesn't screw me. And then John Lee sent me a recording of my tune and I listened through it. And I was like, oh, that was a pretty special performance. And I barely noticed, like the Crunluith doesn't sound, it sounds like maybe not perfect, but it doesn't sound like I missed it. And so I had the wrong idea, right? Imagine if I had just quit when I played the bad Krunla with.
Yeah,
That
you're
would have
just
been a
like,
real
that's a
shame.
scratch. Forget it.
How many bands have won the worlds with poor attacks?
Or a
So
trailing
many.
drone.
Or a trailing drone, right? Well, a trailing drone is already at the end, so it doesn't really
That's
apply to
true.
our
You're right.
analogy.
You couldn't go back, could you?
But imagine if like the whole band just like quit because they had a bad attack. It's like, nope.
Mm.
I mean, you want a good attack. I get it. But first of all, that might not be a deal breaker. And second of all, it might not be the biggest error you're going to make. So it's better to get the full sample size.
Yeah, there's probably no limit to how many like tired cliches or overused phrases are applicable here, but it does make me think of the idea that like perfection can be the enemy of progress, right?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Perfection's a
And
fallacy.
yeah, you're not going to hit that anyway. So maybe stop thinking you'll get there.
Well, we talked about fallibilism in an earlier episode, right? It's like
Yeah.
so important. The issue is not whether or not you're perfect, because there probably is such a thing, but we're not capable of knowing that at the moment, right? And our primary objective is to identify errors and figure out ways to improve on them. So in my performance, what were the errors? And maybe that spot you thought was an error. It's true that's an error, but maybe there's a zoomed out bigger error. That's what it's all about. It's about correcting for these errors that you notice. Sometimes you can identify the errors. Sometimes the free market identifies them. Sometimes a judge identifies them. Sometimes your audience members identify them.
Your instructor identifies them.
Exactly. And it's tough to know exactly when they're going to pop up.
You ever get to, Andrew, in that situation where you have a lopsided tune? And when I say lopsided, I mean like you are so familiar with the first part that you're sick of it, but so unfamiliar with the second part that you couldn't play it with your eyes closed.
Right.
I don't like that feeling. And I think that happens as a result of this as well.
For sure.
And it's like, if you play enough, of course, you'll balance that out. But I don't know. I feel like I've been in situations before where it's like, it feels so unbalanced. I don't want to play it enough to balance it out because, gosh darn it, I'm tired of that first part.
Yeah.
And maybe part of that, too, is how many negative experiences I've now had with that first part of just ripping my hair out and struggling over every little thing. I just don't want to keep going with it. I don't want to finish what I started with that tune.
Yeah. It's true. I think a great way to structure a practice session is to start from the last part and work your way back.
Yeah, I've heard that as a wise thing before, and I've tried it once or twice. I should do it more often, though. I certainly fall into the old habits real easily.
Yeah, like it can be a really good thing. It could break you out, but also it kind of makes sense, right? So I'm going to start with the fourth part. Going to use that to get warmed up, this, that, and the other thing. By the way, the fourth part is probably the least important part. You know, by that point, the judge and the audience, they've already made up their mind what they think about you. So use that as your warm up, you know, and let the cobwebs out. Don't be too hard on yourself. Then back up to the third part, which at least for pipers is often the hardest part. So we're attacking that when we're fairly fresh instead of already kind of burned out, right? And then the second part and the first part, you know, we just kind of look at that. We do that. Now we're all warmed up. We've done our hard practice. And now first part is fresh in our mind. Let's play the whole thing all the way through. That could be a good strategy. Maybe not to use all the time, but it could be really effective. And it could help that feedback problem where we always get stuck talking about how to improve the first part, and it makes you feel resentment and sickness. Pipe bands can be so bad for this.
Oh, yeah.
You know, you get stuck on the break from the march to the stress bay, and the pipe major just can't let it go.
And
so
no,
it's
stop.
all
stop,
you
stop.
talk about.
We're
Yeah,
doing it
stop. Yeah. So pipe majors, you're as guilty as anyone here. You know, pick a commitment and go with it. Terry Lee was merciless in late July. Maybe not even. Maybe it was more like early July. Terry Lee was merciless. It's like, we're going to do it again. You're like, Terry, what do you mean? I'm tired. He's like, we're doing it again. He wouldn't stop. You know, he's not stopping partway. Like we're doing the whole thing. And then, like he was merciless in the other direction, which was interesting because Terry was like, he was such a benevolent leader. He really was. Everyone loved Terry for sure. He was a master. But then like there were certain times where it was like, it was go time and you know, you love your leader. What are you going to do? Well, it turns out you're going to do the medley all the way through with a fairly new read many times because apparently that's what we're doing today.
Yeah.
It was great. It was fantastic. It was funny too because Jack was like the bad cop back in the day. Jack Lee, bad cop. Like that was his role. He wasn't a bad guy, but like his role was like he was the whip. You know, he was like, we're gonna do this. We're gonna work on the stuff. I'm gonna be super intense. And at those times, Terry was like all relaxed. But then occasionally, Terry decided to turn it on and get intense, and it was miraculous. And then Jack Lee just relaxed at the exact right moment, and
Jack
just
turned into a
like,
carrot instead of a whip all of a sudden.
Yeah, he's like, it's time to now put your training to the test. He just kind of enjoyed it. Secret being, those two played the easiest reed in the band for sure. That's the secret, isn't it? But anyway, that's what pipe bands are all about. As a 17-year-old kid in the band, your job is to play a big reed and try to hang on.
Do what you're told.
For sure. It was epic though. I don't know. I feel like it's somewhat related. You know, like if you're going to commit to doing a whole medley, and that's what you're going to do. And you're not going to stop if you screw up the break. You're going to let the break be screwed up, and you're going to go all the way to the end. And then Terry Lee is going to say, cool, let's fix that break. And then we fix the break. And then what do you think we're going to do next? Now we'll do the whole thing again, and the break will be good. Because you know what's going to happen if the break's not good, right? So it's like you're dialed in.
Mm-hmm. It makes sense as a strategy to like not just let the little mistake trip you up and not finish what you'd started, but to also like once you've got it ironed out, make sure you've got it ironed out. Put it in context into the whole scheme of the medley.
I don't know. I'm tired of talking about this. This hasn't gone that well, Jim. Can we try this episode again?
Hey everybody, Andrew Douglas here from the Piper's Dojo, and I just want to say thanks so much for listening to today's iteration of the podcast. If you enjoyed what you heard here today, it would be super helpful to us and to a lot of bagpipers out there trying to find us. If you could give us a top-notch review on whatever platform you're using to listen to this podcast, particularly Apple, iTunes, and Spotify and things like that, your review would be really, really helpful. So if you have a moment today, definitely go over there and help us out. Other than that, until we meet again on the podcast or somewhere else, thanks again for listening.